So first, let's tell
last
people
year's
who Wesley Bell is.
Right. Well, okay. So
Wesley
there's
Bell. Okay, you guys go.
well, I
Let's
just wanted
just
to give.
start all over again. Let's.
Well, no, this is how we do it. By the way, we're already having the conversation. But the
Oh,
so
okay.
there's going to be two kinds of listeners here. There'll be the people who heard after the Uprising season 1 and 2, and they'll be sort of well aware of why we and you in particular, Maria, are interested in Wesley Bell. But then there's going to be kind of the newbie outsider audience. So I think Ruth's asking for that audience who's never heard our show, maybe hasn't heard of you until they're listening to this episode. What's your interest in Wesley Bell? Who is Wesley Bell? Big question.
I think Wesley Bell is scum. I didn't start off that way. When he first started running for prosecuting attorney in 2018, I just remembered him one time, one day in Ferguson. It was on the second day after the murder of Mike Brown. And we literally, not to be too biblical, but we literally were standing in the void. We were standing in the gap between police officers on one side and a very hurt community. Protesting hadn't started at that point. People were just numb. They were just like, there was a, dead body, you know, out on the street for 4+ hours, and people were angry. That's the day that I held a grown man cry for the first time in my life. And you know what he and I thought we were trying to do is maintain peace between the police and the crowd that felt hurt. I mean, that was really a moment where you can feel that energy of sorrow in the crowd, and you could feel and see in people's eyes how much they were hurt, because it could have been them. And at some point, maybe they were stopped by the police, maybe they were racially profiled, and all of that was jogged into their memory. I mean, there was a woman talking about her son. There was a gentleman who is married to a white woman, who that's the guy who was crying in my arms. And he said, I was just in jail the night before, and the police didn't like the fact that I'm married to a white woman. So I saw this guy. I didn't know it was Wesley Bell on the other side of the crowd. I didn't know that.
What was your impression of him?
At that moment?
Yeah.
Oh, he just had one of those button-down shirts and some maybe some jeans on.
He looks observing. Like a hipster, right? Am I wrong to say he looks like a hipster?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I'm trying to coin what he looked like that day because I was writing about it.
Yeah.
And you know how you have those non-wrinkle shirts, button-down shirts, and you wear them over either jeans or some khakis.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was looking like. He had the order to go shirt, button-down shirt on. So non-wrinkle shirt. That's what I remember.
And so to fill in a little bit for the audience, he runs on kind of the back of the Ferguson movement. Because it was a prosecutor issue, right? There was a grand jury that didn't.
That was late in the game. That was late in the game. That was in November 24th to be exact, when the grand jury, made their decision. But that at the very beginning, it had nothing to do with the prosecutor. What it had to do with is a police officer killing a young man, and that body was laying in the streets for 4.5 hours.
Right.
That's what it was about. I mean,
but then when it exploded, correct me if I'm wrong, it was Bob McCullough, the then longtime prosecutor, who had essentially failed to secure any kind of charges around that, which really...
That was months later. Yes, but that was months later.
I know, but I'm not trying to go step by step through every detail of the Ferguson movement with you. Like, we'd kind of like to get to know you with our audience, and so I'm just trying to get through the key moments with Wesley.
Okay.
Bell. Wesley gets into office. I call you up over getting to Wesley. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I'm just trying to establish, like, how does Wesley end up as St. Louis County prosecutor?
Well, what we found out when we were putting together after the uprising is that he was actually at that moment in 2014 involved in municipal government. I had not known that at the time. And, fast forward to 2018, the only memory that I had of Wesley Bell was of him being on that parking lot between police officers and a crowd that was feeling the moment of a young man that was slain by a police officer. He and I were the only ones who were standing in the gap at that moment.
I actually just want to skip somewhere else entirely, to be honest. I would like to get into, well, I mean, the other day we got on the phone and we congratulated each other because we are nominated for an NAACP Image Award. And so I take it this is your first? Haha.
This is my first nomination for an NAACP Image Award, and it feels fantastic. And this is like a moment of pride. I am so thankful to you and Duffy for bringing me in and, trusting me to be a part of the team. And I'm grateful to be in a space I never thought that I would be in.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're grateful back. I mean, right? We did take a little bit of a risk because you were like a media personality in the sense that you'd been a longtime successful politician and leader in Missouri, but you'd never been, officially an investigative journalist, a producer or podcast producer, or like a host or personality. So this is a pretty strong way to come out the gate.
Well, I will say I was a personality. I have a big old personality. But for all the other things, you're absolutely correct.
Come out of the gate of what?
Well, okay. So, I mean, can you kind of tell our audience what your memory was of how, I guess we first approached you to be involved with season 1, and then
you were nagging me. We were in the middle of COVID.
I was surprised you picked up and called me back because you were a state senator. You had bigger
I was back in the house. I was back in the house. It was COVID. It was during COVID. And I mean, COVID was huge and no one knew how to respond. And I remember just sitting in my office, and there is a gentleman that both of us know, Harvey K. And he was like, well, you don't have to call back, but I know him and I've talked to him. And you just kept calling, just nagging me. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about this,
Why did you not want to talk about it?
Because I felt as though I would have to make a comment about whether Melissa's son, Danye Dion Jones, which is the subject matter of season 1, if I would have to say out loud whether, it was a homicide or if it was something else. And I didn't want to say that because there were so many people in the press who were pushing for me to say that it was a homicide, but I didn't know. So what we agreed to in the call, and I remember the day I had my lights on in my office and my dogs with me, but I remember saying I can help with procedures and protocols because I know procedures and protocols, and I know in government every entity has to have a set of procedures and a set of protocols, and that's what I agreed to. And so I couldn't make a determination because I wasn't the investigator on the crime scene. I wasn't there. I couldn't speak out of turn because I didn't know. What I did know is that we did have a series of mysterious deaths of frontline activists who were involved in Ferguson. That's what I did know.
You were the first to really call it out publicly, right? You went to the state Senate floor and gave that speech after Edward Crawford.
I did. And I mean, Eddie is from the same area of town that I'm from. And so, being close to a lot of the teachers and the educators in our area, they knew him. They knew all about him. And then when I tied, that award-winning photo of Eddie Crawford, and the fact that he was from the neighborhood, and the fact that he was just, involved in his own way in the Ferguson uprising, I was intrigued, but like I wanted to know the circumstances. I wanted to know, was this a setup? Was it what they said it was? What was it? And so I naturally had, and there were several of these cases of people who were prominent, um, who ended up dying. I remember on November 24th, it was, where, there was not, um, a decision that the public wanted, when it came to the police officer.
Mm.
And I remember that there was a fire. I remember that there was a death that night because I was watching it on social media. Well, fast forward to season 2, we find out, that some of those subjects were in, they were part of our season 2, in a small way. But they were a part of it. But all of those things together just added up to, there's a question. So let's look at how the investigation was done.
So what made you want to participate in season 2?
You know what? I needed to do something different. I had a very, very rotten experience for the first time in public service, and I wanted to go into another direction. I had been told by my employer, that I was not allowed to do any documentaries. I was not allowed to do any podcasts. I was not allowed to speak on my expertise as a former state senator. And I was in dismay. So when when this was mentioned as a possibility of something to do, I was like, I'm going to show them, and 3 years later, look, we have our second nomination, NAACP Image Award nomination,
So you were censored as a senator, as a former?
No, I went from the Senate to the House, and then after I left the legislature, I worked for St. Louis County. And
Which is the area that you would come to investigate. So that was
yes.
So it's almost a whistleblower.
Speaking of which, I helped write the ordinance for whistleblowing. So yes, and I carved out some of the infringements and federal violations, within that ordinance that I was experiencing myself. But I felt as though, this was like that moment to do something totally different and join the gig world. And that's what I did. And it was a transition because you have to be really, really flexible. And I didn't know everything in this world. And you and John and Mallory had to teach me a lot of the things. And my instinct also was a part of this because I am naturally inquisitive, which is a necessary skill set as a legislator, but it was quite useful in our 2.5-year journey, trying to find out, how Darren Seals, was murdered.
And I don't know how we have to say it, but I mean, I feel we got to those answers, right? People listen to episode 10, they listen to the whole season, but they get through episode 10, and I think they're going to feel they understand within a reasonable certainty who was the trigger man, who were the accomplices, who likely ordered it, and what the possible motivations were, which was not something that existed 2 years before when we started this process, right?
That's exactly right.
Now, here's what, if we're going to talk about spilling the tea and then sipping it, I have been always triggered and bothered by the fact that this podcast, including season 1 and 2, after the Uprising podcast, has revealed so much and has done such amazing investigative work, and yet St. Louis / the media of St. Louis has completely muffled it. And I just want to know.
Now, you don't have any thoughts on that, do you, Maria?
Do you happen to have any thoughts on that? Because obviously it's clear why they want it muffled, but
it's not clear to me.
Wait, well, it is to me.
Okay.
But going back to the Wesley Bell of it all, do you think he's part of the silencing of it all, being like, hey, by the way, there's this thing?
All right, so we've thrown a lot of big questions out. Let's let Maria.
I know it's a lot, but
here.
basically, my point is, why is this little tiny podcast with people involved who like nobody actually knows about except in certain circles, heavily censored to the point that you can't even get a spot in like the local news?
I just know Maria's like itching to answer this like as of a minute ago, so let her talk.
So first of all, it is incredible news, and as someone who, you know, I take pride in, when I was 5 years old, I voted for Jimmy Carter at my elementary school, you know, so I've always watched the news, I've always read the news. It's the first thing that I do in the morning, it's the last thing I do at night, and the work that we did was stellar. I mean, it's stuff that I don't see, quite frankly, often. I think the last time I saw something that really delved into an issue was a 7-part series in the Post-Dispatch dealing with nursing homes, and how they have failed those who are most vulnerable, the residents in nursing homes. And I think in 1988 they did also a series on radioactive waste and how the processing of uranium made a lot of people ill. Those are two areas. And I think also the Monsanto explosion. Those are stories that stood out historically for me when it comes at least to the Post-Dispatch. And then we had something called the Riverfront Times, where they have done incredible reporting. And I mean, for like 30 years, they've done incredible reporting. And part of the information we got, you know, came from some of these sources. But when it came to our story, who done it? Who done it?
Right.
Not even the black that's what I was so amazed by. Not even the black paper picked it up, and Indiana's black paper, Indianapolis's black paper picked it up.
Right.
Even when Duffy and I wrote that letter to the editor, that never even showed up. That never even showed up.
That is so weird.
Well, this, you know, half free, half slave state. And it goes back to why Ferguson even happened, the uprising. And it's because people like to stay silent, I guess. I mean, you know, some people were suggesting maybe it's because it was iHeart and it's a competing entity, you know, but you would think that some paper would cover this. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
and I just feel blackballed, honestly. I think that the work that we did, because maybe they didn't do it.
Right.
I don't know what the issue is. I just know I feel as though our story, which was well done, well researched, and by the way, we have multiple stories that we can talk about that we didn't get to talk about in what we, you know, achieved in 10 episodes. You know, those are great stories, but without having a conversation with people who delved into why did one of these deaths happen? You know, do you care that the prosecutor, Wesley Bell, didn't give a damn? You know, did you, I mean,
well, because Duffy will kill me if we reveal too much about what we found. But basically, one of the findings was that everything we found about who was involved in Darren Seal's murder, it turns out the cops found out too, and they told the prosecutor's office right at the time when Wesley Bell was transferring into that office. So he had a long time in which he could have gone after the shooter they even arrest us, like a SWAT team essentially came and held the shooter for like 3 days in the Justice Center, lets him out. And so there's this whole question about why there was never a prosecution for him, any of the accomplices involved in the destruction of a body, and not to mention the person who possibly ordered it. And so what's really amazing is that they don't cover this when not only do we find that, but at that time he's running for U.S. Congress, a position that he was just sworn in, this week into, right?
My thing is, what does a Black man running for these kinds of positions have to lose by hindering this kind of information?
Nothing.
And right. And so why then? You know what I mean? Like, you just got to keep asking why.
I mean, I've always thought, working in St. Louis County government and having to keep track of the budget for all of the departments and reviewing every single presentation from that office, I would just say he's lazy. And he is. And but he really, is.
You're too lazy to protect Black Lives Matter, to continue a movement, to find justice for innocent people, to put the right people in jail. Finally, something that the system often does not.
He was taking pictures. He was Ray will tell you, we have found multiple occasions where murderers were let out of jail, failure to prosecute, and then went out and killed again.
Oh God!
I would even venture to say that some of the murders that we've had in the last 5 years since he's been prosecuting attorney were people who were under the authority of St. Louis County Justice Center.
And so as we're finding all this at the tail end of production for season 2, Wesley is running for U.S. Congress against Cori Bush, and you decided what? You felt compelled by what you were seeing regarding Bell and the potential
failure. And I said, well, I'm going to run for office. And I knew that it was a long shot. You know, usually you prepare for these things in advance. You have money up front, and people know what you're about to do, you know. And I needed to be the loyal opposition because I dreamt about being in government when I was a little kid. Okay. This is like what I knew that I would want to do. When I was in college, all I knew is that here's what I knew. I wanted to help educate people of color on the issues so that they can be better educated and vote according to what they know. We are at a point today where the electorate is not as educated on these issues. So case in point is, this sex discrimination, age discrimination lawsuit that may be in the talks of a settlement, according to the Post-Dispatch. So, I really feel, and I wish that there was somebody who could tell me in the press, the local press, why they didn't want to cover it. I wish there was someone who would just, even off the record, would say, here's why we didn't cover it. The closest thing that we got to is Ryan Krull. And I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but because we don't have the Riverfront Times anymore, he went to St. Louis Magazine. He's an incredible reporter. He is one of the entities who wrote about that 900-page FBI surveillance report on Darren Seals. And so he's one of those people I watch, but that was in the last 2 months, I believe. Right. We released our podcast in, June 11th of last year?
Right.
Well, I'm not much of a conspiracist, but my gut instinct tells me that there's something sinister, something dark, and some people, not even a person, but an organization that maybe that they're even afraid to put out there, basically holding people like Bell and maybe even journalists in fear, basically being like, hey, do you like having all of your fingers? You know what I mean? Like, I hate to say it, but it sounds almost like a weird mafia gang thing behind the suppression of it, because those are the only people who would benefit from oppressing this.
Well, you know what? I think it's the political elite. I think it's the wealthy masters of Wesley Bell who have dictated his journey, and he loves it. And I think that's one of the reasons I even suspect, I don't know this, but in our investigatory work, I even suspect that he made deals with defense attorneys and decided not to prosecute. It's, certain cases because of contributions. I mean, we track that. I think it's very possible that while he was running for Congress, he was pulling on the strings of people who had to rely on the prosecutor's office in multiple cases. So, I don't think he's a kosher guy at
Absolutely
all.
not. No, I think he did it. I think he knew that if he or certain people knew that if they allowed coverage of this podcast, it would unearth themselves. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and I think that there's
It would
still a
put them in trouble.
possibility.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, also APAC, I mean, famously they like offered him the chance, like we'll fund you, right? I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Maria, but this has come out that that they offered to fund him if he would run against Corey, and so he took it, and it worked. And so if they're putting money in, they're very powerful and influential. Is it possible that they
opportunist
asked that the papers kind of? But I find that hard to believe. Most newspapers of record are going to go where the corruption is if they can expose that in the midst of a race.
You know what?
Not, Maria?
You know what I don't get? I just don't get how communities, especially like people of color, right? And me being a Latina myself, this makes me so angry. When it is to someone like me so obvious that the person at the forefront doesn't give a damn about things that are worth fighting for and protecting in your community, and then they vote for them anyway. Or they help, or they do certain things or actions that help these people get ahead, maybe by not getting involved or not saying anything or whatever. I just cannot wrap my head around that kind of corruption and self-sabotage from an entire community that not very long ago was the epicenter of a very important movement in modern history.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe something more positive would be, I really wanted to get back, and I think this segues. I wanted to get a little into your history, because I think this is dropping the week of a big inauguration that's causing half the country to want to throw itself out a window, and the other and the other half feels differently.
And things have already started even before the Cheetos in town.
But a lot of people, but there's a lot of people who I think if they haven't turned to run. There have been people for about the last 8 years, I would say, who are not the people who would normally have wanted to run for office, but they're seeing what's going on and they think to themselves, well, maybe I got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But they think, it's funny, right? The people who should be in power are the ones who are sort of least interested in it. And so I wonder what you could impart to them about when you were, was it 20? You were 29 when you first ran for Missouri House of Rep?
Yes, when I won, I was the age of Barbara Jordan.
And I mean, I can't imagine being in my late 20s and making like a real legitimate run and then actually managing to get into that kind of an office. So I don't know, for somebody who wants to run, what are they in for and what do they need to do? And then what do you remember about that first experience and that win?
Yeah, it was somebody who wants to run and feels like they don't have the financial support or the preceding reputation in politics.
How did you get it?
Being hungry. I knew that I wanted to be in public service my entire life. I knew that. And, I walked doors like you're supposed to. I studied. Every single day I woke up, I asked myself, how are you going to prove that you are worthy today? Every day. And so for me, being an elected official means that you're giving yourself. And you're giving yourself, you're giving your time. You are learning, you are studying. I mean, my first filibuster in 2011, I studied for it for like 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Wow. Yeah. And nobody believed that I was going to do that filibuster because I'm a big old girl. But nobody believed that I was going to do that filibuster for 10 hours and 45 minutes. And I did. And I didn't just like read a book. I read from cases. Coincidentally, the issue was about work discrimination, which is one of the reasons why I take this pending lawsuit on age and sex discrimination very seriously. Um, you know, as a senator, I filibustered terrible legislation that undid like law all the way back to like 1965. I mean, all the good policies that were adopted from that point, they were trying to take away. And that was before I myself was discriminated against in the job that I had. We had 8 counts against them, 3 federal and 5 state. And a lot of it had to do with my First Amendment, but a lot of it had to do with discrimination. And luckily, I was already at that point where, I was taking notes and just keeping up with every single incident that occurred. Um, and it was, it's one thing to fight for others without the experience. It's another thing to fight for others with the experience.
So but I mean, let's take this one step at a time because because you had a 16-year career as a political leader in Missouri, and so the first step one, like, what made you think you could? You've said you wanted to be in that role your whole young life, right? But then you're 29. What made you think you could win that time, and how did you win that time?
Walking doors. I lived in the neighborhood my entire life. Born and raised, that's a big deal, being born and raised in one neighborhood. So I knew a lot of people. They knew me when I was a kid. I went to school with their children who were now adults, So people knew me from the neighborhood. They knew that I was already active being unelected. I was working for the lieutenant governor's office before I ran for office. And the reason why I was talking about I don't know if it was 5 or 7-part series about nursing homes in 2003 in the Post Dispatch is because, we needed the Post Dispatch and and all media to talk about the situation when it came to senior citizens in nursing homes in my neighborhood, at the nursing home where my great great aunt Lucille stayed is where 4 women ended up dying because the nursing home refused to put on the air conditioning. And
Wow.
that became part of the 7-part series that was in the Post Dispatch. So it was very personal to me, one, because I had a family member there. And in our family, like many Latina families, we keep our seniors in our home until we can't take care of them any longer. That's what we did with my great grandmother. That's what we did with my great great aunts. In the room where I'm talking to you right now, is where my great great aunt Lucille was in her bed, and we were taking care of her until we could no longer take care of her anymore. And she went to that nursing home. So, getting to the point, like, people knew me as an advocate. They the high school, it's all about high school. People knew me from where I went to school. So I had a lot of friends, the parents of people who I went to school with. They were like, I remember you, and so they called me by my nickname. And it was just, people knew me in the neighborhood. I walked doors. I was hungry for it. And, one of the ways you raise money is by people who are in your inner circle, and then you branch out from there. But, it's really the power of the people who loved me and believed in me. That's why I was so gracious and so grateful when I won. And it was not an easy election in 2004, as we had the marriage amendment ban. And literally, the district was, one side of it mostly white, the other side of it mostly black. And you had the Black religious right who were at the polls saying that I was a sinner because I believed in same-sex marriage. So that election, even though I had worked my butt to the bone going door to door, multiple times in certain neighborhoods, I only won by 194 votes that time.
Wow.
And I worked really hard for it. But every time I ran for office, I had to work hard for it. It's nothing that's given. That's why, like, when I look at Wesley Bell, he didn't do what I had to do. He was bought and paid for.
And then, I mean, what was that feeling? Like you wanted it and you win the first time, and then is the feeling just woohoo, I won, or is it, oh God, now I gotta do this, like I gotta come through for my community, or I don't know.
It's shocking, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, how was it? I mean, what was it like walking in there and having to do the job?
Now I got to do the work. I was blessed that one of my mentors was the first female statewide office holder. She lived in my precinct. She was my mentor, Harriet Woods, and I was her last mentee. And so she poured all of her knowledge into me. And, people like you don't know these names, but, people locally would know these names, Sheila Lumpy and Barbara Frazier. These are people who did the job. They did the work. Margaret Donnelly, they were students of the law, students of statute. And that's what I modeled myself after, because I didn't want to just show up for work. I wanted to show my value. That was very, very important to me, was to show my value as a servant to the public. And that's what I did. It was selfless work.
What was your...
Well, I wanted to ask you, have you considered mentoring any current candidates or inspiring women out there?
You know what? I did for a long time. Usually you do that when you're elected. I will tell you that things have changed to a certain degree. We had the Sushier Institute, which was for specifically women. And I oftentimes would go to their training seminars to help educate people who wanted to get involved either in the background or as candidates. And I would tell them how I did it, how I achieved this goal of being an elected person. And, I'm in a different place in my life. I feel as though when I'm fighting sex discrimination, I'm standing up for women. When I am fighting for the First Amendment, I am standing up for women. So I have evolved into a different space where, I want to feed my soul, and I want to continue to leave a legacy. And I think part of that legacy is the amazing work that we did on After the Uprising season 2.
This is a leading question, but you mentioned it with such pride. Are you basically as proud of the work that we did on season 2 as anything that happened in your 16 years in office? Or I don't know. What are you most proud of over your career?
I had to work my ass off in the legislature, and I had to work my ass off on this podcast. It was nothing that was given.
Yeah.
Because of how we worked was, product proven. I mean, we had to bring our product to the table. We met every single week, and we had to talk about which rabbit hole we were going down that week, and then compare notes and then follow up, in areas that we thought were significant. So, I enjoyed the work. It was meaningful. It was public service in a different way. And that's the bottom line is that it was public service in a different way. And it brought in all of my expertise. That's why I was listening to, the bonus episode. I actually posted it on my Twitter X, but in my, what do you call it? YouTube. But there's a part in it that reminded me, which part was it? I just lost my thought. But there's a part of it that reminded me why I was here. You know, like get to work. There's not an option. You just have to get to work. You know, you have certain experience. You know, for 22 years, I was in public service, you know, working for the former lieutenant governor, working in St. Louis County, and then being elected for 16 years. And there are things that you know are normal when it comes to bureaucracy. And then there are things that, you know, don't really make too much sense. And that's what I brought to the podcast.
Exactly. I was going to say, you gave us a compliment earlier where you kind of said that we taught you. I mean, we didn't have to teach you much. We were kind of like, here's basically how it works. And what you brought to it was essential, because we got by as outsiders in season 1, but to really get to the bottom of Darren Seals, like, you had to be connected and you had to be trusted by the world out there, and you certainly are. And so you were, you know, anybody that needed to be talked to, you were able to go through that door, and that made all the difference. And, you know, I don't know if there was what you found to be what required the most adjustment for you, or the most struggle.
Ooh, the violence. So part of our, as you know, one of the rabbit holes was getting to know the streets in a very intimate way. And when we were exploring the life of the rappers and the gang members, and going through not only their mugshots, but also their rap videos and their Facebook pages, you know, there's so much violence. And I think at one point in time, if you remember, I started having nightmares because of all of the violence that I was seeing in my research and my discovery work.
We felt like we were counting bodies. I mean,
we were.
Yeah.
I mean, we were counting bodies. You know, like, what a thing to say or see or report. We were counting bodies. And, you know, like, you know, even in the music, I mean, there's some music that I just felt like I would feel any other rapper, but there's other music that was just dark. And it really reflects, and the police reports, that's the other thing. The police reports, when you combine the police reports with some of the rap songs and some of the pictures that you saw in social media, I mean, it does a job on you. And, you know, I was open with you guys about that.
Yeah, you and I would both back and forth. I think we were both deeply troubled because, yes, it was the indiscriminate sometimes of the violence, or the lack of almost motive. It was like
it seems senseless,
very senseless violence that certain peoples were very capable of, that we were sort of tracking the story of. And then knowing that we were kind of finding that some of these folks may have been involved in Darren Seals' murder, and having to get in touch with them and enter their world, bring them into our worlds, and you actually living out there. Highly unsettling, that combination.
I think it's safe to say that most violence is senseless. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's
a lot of it is.
Usually,
yeah,
right?
But I think the majority, like, that's what makes violence just so, like, icky to witness or read about, because most of it is so unnecessary or senseless to the normal person, right? Who's not brainwashed into thinking that this is how justice is served, over like something petty or stupid or trivial.
Maria and I, who are kind of a little bit of an odd couple, although I think we have a lot of commonalities, but
we're brother and sister. That's how we are.
Wonderful. I agree.
You always wanted a sister.
There's two. I have two memories of, like, there was the phone call we had after we confronted a particular party with the evidence that he was likely involved. You know, that he knew more than he was saying about Darren Seals' murder, right? What do you remember about our call right after that?
Oh man, like, we both paused. Yeah. Like, we both, I'm going to reveal something, but I had to smoke a joint. After that call, I'm serious.
I was pounding alcohol while I was talking with you.
I was so scared after that phone call. But here's the other thing. We were prepared. We were prepared. We read all the police reports. We knew the game, but we didn't talk to the person. So, like, talking to that person, already knowing their background, already knowing the crimes that they were suggested to be involved in, we threw them off their game for a second, but we were thrown off because it was just so real. Like when the one person said it's a dangerous game, like that.
Episode 8 of season 2, for those who are like, I want to go check this out. I'm very proud, by the way. I listened to that recently, and like, you're right, we were prepared. You could tell that we built up and built up, right? We got we knew how we might answer on this, that, and the other thing, and we could use that to go here and there, and we tag teamed it pretty in a pretty interesting way. I thought it holds up.
Oh, we did really well, and that was totally off script. Like it wasn't even something that we said, well, you do this and you do that. It wasn't even like that. It was like there's certain aspects, like you had your own rabbit hole, I had mine. And we just took turns. We didn't say that we were going to take turns. It was just the void of the moment, and we filled in that void.
You guys became detectives and subpoenaed people,
which is why he says to us at some point, like, you guys sound like cops.
Yeah, you were.
Which didn't sound like a compliment coming from this particular person.
Well, if the cops in Missouri would have done their job,
no, it's the prosecutor, Ruth. It's the prosecutor. The prosecutor did his job.
There you go. The prosecutor would have done his job. Well, you know what I'm trying to say.
So jumping backwards, so was there so you seem to be very yeah, and then I'm sorry, so I mentioned, so that's one phone call right after that interview where we were both like kind of sweating bullets and trading notes and then comforting each other. And then there was the call that happened maybe a week ago where we found out about the NAACP Image Award nomination, a win I feel we both were really needing at this particular moment. And
by the way, people need to go vote for the podcast. The way that you win is by public voting.
Yeah, we'll put the vote.naacpimageaward.net, I think it is. We'll scroll down to the bottom, click on podcast, outstanding, like news and information. We'll put the link in this episode. But so we had some interesting times on that. What about going back to your, because I don't know how much time before they kick us out of the library here. Going back to your, by comparison to your career in politics, was there one moment that was the scariest or the most trying for you?
There are a lot of those. I mean, interviewing Darren's mother for hours on end. And I mean, she was a woman on the move, even though she was frail and dealing with, health issues. It took incredible patience. But then some of her stories were heartbreaking, and certain things that she was dealing with, I thought about certain people in my own family and what they endured, but that was part of it. I would say certain interviews were part of it.
And I apologize. What I was actually asking is by comparison. So we've talked a little bit about some of your memories and, the experiences that stand out from the podcast. What about by comparison when you were in office? Were there any similarly trying or scary moments? What was the toughest?
Oh, death threats. All the death threats I got.
Was that around your Kathy Griffin moment?
No, it was way before that.
Okay.
It was way before that. I mean, standing up for immigrants, I was getting death threats. I had someone outside my house with a rifle in his car. I just had come from Kansas City. I had crosshair stickers outside my office door. I had substances delivered to my office that we didn't know if it was rat poisoning or something else. Wow. So, I mean, literally, when I make a call to my local police, I have about 10 cars that show up still.
Well, maybe that's why people don't want to run for office, Ray. Maybe that's the answer. It's like yes, you want to do things for the community, but you have to be strong enough to put up with the side effects of it, like getting death threats and being poisoned.
That's Ruth, let me just say this. That's only when you have courage. Because the people who are like Wesley Bell, they don't have to deal with stuff like that. People who stand up and have a pair, they're the ones who go through those things. People who stand up for others who are the most vulnerable go through those experiences. But if you're just going with the flow and with the crowd, you don't have to worry about any of that.
See, I can't. I'm such a person who would only run like doing the work that matters, like not the Bell way, I guess. That's like what I immediately envision. You know what I mean? But yes, you're absolutely right.
I've been pretty lost for the last couple months because I don't know how do you go forward, and how do you have any hope or optimism in a world in which someone who acts the way Donald Trump has acted for 8 years gets elected again? What are we supposed to do here?
You mean, how do you stay motivated in a place
that I
like
feel all of the air going out of my fight. If we couldn't beat this guy after 24 felony counts and a coup,
34.
Now he's going to be the most powerful man on earth for 4 years to life, then how am I supposed to think I can win anything ever? Why am I going to fight?
I'm just telling you, I'm focusing on Hounding Clayton.
Okay.
And I have taken a vow I'm not going to deal with this man.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to deal with him. I'm going to try my best not to deal with him.
Yeah.
I've been good so far. But I just really think that there should be a certain kind of coverage of local politics, because there's so many people who are inept, who are elected right now, who are not doing the due diligence that's required by the people, that the people deserve. They're not getting that. And so I in a different way, want to be an instigator. I want to make elected officials think more strategically when it comes to serving the most vulnerable in society. And here's the thing. I was in that position of making decisions for 22 years. So I'm one of the best people to do it, at least in my hometown. So that's where I'm focusing. I'm until I get to the point where I need to address, I feel the need to address, 47, then I will. But I'm not, wanting to put my energy there, because I saw that it got me nowhere.
So you've segued into what I think could be a good closer for this, which is, what is Hounding Clayton? Can you tell us about that and what you're trying to do there?
So it stemmed out of all of everything that we've been talking about, is how the seat of government in St. Louis County has failed so many people, whether it's the county council or whether it's the county executive, or Wesley Bell, who is a prosecutor who let murderers out on the street, slept with his staffers, has had multiple sex discrimination lawsuits and wrongful termination lawsuits. I mean, my goodness, I feel the need to address the seat of government, which is Clayton, Missouri. And so that's why it's called Hounding Clayton.
And so this is a podcast that you're starting?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. There's so much technology that's involved, and Ray knows that I'm not the technology person on our team. So everything that I've done on my own, and it's one step at a time. I don't pretend for a second to be brilliant at what I'm doing on my own, but I want to have a voice. And if there are some people who would want to listen in, so be it. If there's some people who just don't want to listen to me, I don't care. I've been through the fire multiple times. As I've said to people, I've been to hell and back a few times, so not too much bothers me.
So we just got a message on the library computer basically saying that our session's about to end. So out of fear that they may kick us out soon, where can people find you, Maria? Where can people listen to or follow Hounding Clayton?
Hounding Clayton can be found on YouTube, Blue Sky, X, TikTok while it lasts, Instagram, and probably some other places I can't remember right now. But the handle is Hounding Clayton.
That's where you can follow Maria until hopefully you hear and after the Uprising season 3, maybe in about a year or so. Who knows?
You never know. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your time, and it's been a really fascinating journey to watch you both work together.
We didn't even get to talk about the settlement article.
Well, that's going to have to be a follow-up episode, maybe.
Yeah, that's a follow-up episode, but I'm going to leave it up here.
Settlement pending and discrimination lawsuit involving Wesley Bell. Well, you know what? They're going to have to go to Hounding Clayton to hear your update on that.
Yes.
They're going to have to go to Hounding. And I mentioned in the article. Yeah. So that's awesome.
You're mentioned in the article.
Yeah, I can't believe that our podcast is never mentioned, but I am mentioned in this article.
They won't mention.
No.
Well, it is always a joy to talk to y'all, and thank you so much for inviting me to your show.
Oh yeah, let's do it again.
Absolutely. And,
best of luck.
Don't forget, you gotta, I don't know, send us the link to the recorded files.
I will do that now.
All right, be well. Talk to you again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.